Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the kickoff of this spring semester's Berlage Keynotes, part of the Faculty of Architecture's public programs. I'm very pleased to have Andrés Jaque kick off this semester's series. We have tried for a very long time to get him here in various capacities at the Berlage, and I'm very pleased that we were able to finally find this moment, especially in person, after 2 years of shifting back and forth between analog and digital. Andrés Jaque founded the Office for Political Innovation in 2003, where the approach of the office is transsectional, looking at architecture through different kinds of relationships and at different scales. He has been a visiting professor at the Cooper Union and Princeton, and is currently the director of the Advanced Architectural Design Studies at Columbia University. In many ways, we are friendly competitors between the Berlage and the AAD program. At any rate, thank you for crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Thank you for being here in person, and we all very much look forward to the talk this evening. Thank you, Andrés.
Thank you very much, Solomon. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very, very pleased to be here. Thank you all for coming, and I'm happy to have this conversation in person and with those that also are remote or spatially or temporarily. I'm going to go a little bit fast, so I would advise anyone to write any question or any petition to expand on a particular topic, idea, or any complaint or disagreement that you might have. I'd be super happy to respond to them either today or later if you write me. Or okay, I think this is the one, right? What we see here is the first photograph that was taken from one of the most photographed device, from a part of one of the most photographed devices in architectural modern history, and which is the Barcelona Pavilion. But this is the basement of the Barcelona Pavilion. I took this photograph, I believe, around 2007, and it was basically the first time I visited this basement. I saw a little kind of thing like this on the floor. I opened it and I discovered that there was this huge basement that occupies the entire footprint of the pavilion. What we see here is a piece of glass that was removed from the bottom of the lake where the Colbert sculpture is, and it was removed because previously because someone basically stepped on the pond to fix something, a light, and then basically they broke it. So what it was very surprising for me is that when you see this way to display the glass, it's not that disconnected to the exhibitions that Lily Reich designed. If you remember, if you have in mind, for instance, the designs that she did for the Barcelona International Fair of the glass industry, they were not that different, these frontal dispositions of glasses, tinted glasses. This is the way we are trained to see the Barcelona Pavilion. This way of showing it is very particular. It's everyone that goes to, all the architects that go to the Barcelona Pavilion, they take the same photograph. So we go there to replicate. The first photograph that I took probably was very similar to this. It's very similar to what basically everyone's been taking. But I think that there's something that changes if we start looking at the Barcelona Pavilion. That was reconstructed in the 1980s as a two-story building. Two-story building in which the upper floor has to replicate this kind of illusion that architecture doesn't age, that doesn't need to be fixed, that doesn't need to have an industry behind, that is just a direct translation of what Mies had in his brain. Brains becoming marble or bronze or whatever. When we see what the employees do, basically in the basement, we see that there's a huge amount of things that are not allowed to happen in the basement. Like, for instance, warming up your Tupperware, for instance, or your lunch. But there's a microwave in the basement. There's things that basically cannot fit within this kind of idealized version of what architecture is in the upper floor. but are very easily allocated in another part of the building, in the basement. But when we look in detail, what is behind it, you see those collages that the employees do, the Barcelona Pavilion's employees do with the invitations they get from galleries or photographs from newspapers or magazines. It's not that different to the collage that Mies van der Rohe, the language of collage that Mies van der Rohe used to produce these buildings. So for me, there's something that is missing from Mies and Lilienreich. There's a part of modernity that we're missing by idealizing modernity. And I believe that there's much more of modern architecture that we've missed by not understanding it as a collective construction, a construction that is done through experimentation, through tentative tries, through societal association. An architecture that would allow for that to be seen probably would be much more useful for us to intervene the politics of contemporary times. When we see, for instance, this, I insist, they are part of modern tradition. There's this part of modern tradition that we're missing. These are the curtains as they are placed. This is 6 months later. This is when they're taken to the basement. There's something of these photographs that also intrigues me, which is really how much care is placed in protecting something that is old. Like if the part of the fact that it was part once of the upper floor means that it retains some value. If you see the employees put some cardboard to protect the velvet from getting damaged in the contact with the concrete. It was raised with a palette. There's all this care that is used to preserve these fragments. And for me, there's something that we can learn of this. I think that there's a hidden story, kind of a hidden secret that the employees have, that they know the fragility of the upper floor and how valuable it is to work to preserve it. There's something of the relationship of the upper floor with the basement that is like the picture of Dorian Gray. There's an alliance, a pact, a collective pact that we had in the past that we have to preserve architecture as exceptional by evacuating from it all the ordinary. But I think we are in a different moment for architecture, and we have to go back to that was left in the basement to understand how architecture, how we have changed. This is, for instance, the most important part for me, the most exciting part of the basement. This is the place where Catna Nebula lived. Catna Nebula was brought here, being kind of just born, because basically there were mice in the pavilion. If we use the terminology that is being developed in the field of political ecology, we could say that the cosmopolitical composition of the pavilion, as it was perceived by those that reconstructed it in the 1980s, is something that would not contain mice. So Catna Nebula became an architectural device that was brought in this cosmopolitical composition to redo the original design and make sure that in that ecology there would not be mice. I'm intentionally using a very pretentious language that comes, I know that it sounds a little bit artificial, but it comes from political ecology theory. And I think it's very important that we understand that the design of the pavilion was not only done with marble and steel structure, but it was also done by introducing someone like Catna Nebula. Nebula means fog. And that comes from, the name of the cat comes from this, you see there's a little bit of a white veil in her eyes. That was because basically she lived her entire life in the basement hunting the mice. She would only be taking 1 hour a day to the upper floor to make sure that also she could go around and hunt the ones that could jump there. And by basically staying in the darkness of the basement her entire life, she developed this atrophia macular. And this is, for me, incredibly important, because basically we believe that architecture is there to welcome societies. Architecture is like a neutral box, is said often, and society comes and occupies it. Good architecture is neutral. Tafuri would say that the Barcelona Pavilion was just a neutral theater, that anyone could perform freely in it. But it's not. It's not if we look at actors like Catna Nebula. She's physically shaped by the way that she's introduced in the pavilion. Her body, her eyes are directly, materially, physically transformed by the relationships he has with the pavilion. She's both a designer, she's a device that transforms the cosmopolitical design of the pavilion, but she's also transformed by it. And this is a fundamental difference in the way that we can understand societies now from contemporary political ecology, because we can see that basically we are both actors that shape the societal, and we are saved by it. We are contributing to produce architecture, but we are also saved by architecture. This condition of reflectivity is, in my opinion, is one of the most important things that we can consider now about architecture. It's one of the things that basically with the experience with COVID, that we were both producing COVID in a way as a societal reality, but also we were transformed by it. Our lives, our relationships, but also our bodies were transformed by it. And this reflexivity, reflectivity is something that is put us in a very different position from modern theory. Somehow we see that architecture is not something that is out there, but it's also bodied. And the way we body architecture is the way that we get connected and expand beyond the confinement of our bodies into something that is produced collectively. The way that we intervene in the Barcelona Pavilion was basically by moving things around, by redefining the way the different entities, the different actors using Bruno Latour's terminology developed in the actor network theory that are composing the cosmopolitical reality that we call the pavilion could be rearticulated. Just rearticulating what was down there, becoming invisible to maximize the visibility of other actors is basically a way to intervene in architecture now. Maybe architecture is not about the creation of neutral boxes that contain the social. Maybe architecture is not a new beginning, but maybe architecture is just the rearticulation of the societal. Architecture is never happening maybe on a tabula rasa, but it's a way to reconnect, to rearticulate what already exists. The name that we gave to it was, this installation is Phantom, in reference to the famous and kind of foundational piece by Walter Lippmann on public space, considering that public space was not actually a space. The realm of publicness is articulation, is association, is assemblage. What architecture does is not producing space, but actually producing articulation, assembling heterogeneity, bringing different actors into a collective composition. And that is something that allows us to reread the history of architectural composition and the theories of composition, not as something that we have to throw off, but something that has a new contemporary life. Maybe architecture is now something about cosmopolitical composition, and it's much more about assemblage and reassemblage than about the space making and hosting the already existing societal. This is something that it's dividing architecture and architect critiques. If we see this building 432 Park Avenue, you see that many people, many architects say, okay, this is a building that is quite elegant. It looks a little bit like a Hoffman object, right? It's part of the tradition of maybe minimalism, maybe Sol Levitt. And what is that architects can be blamed about inequality or about the fact that this is becoming a way to storage money and to launder money? Maybe it's not that related to the architectural field. Maybe the power of architecture is not that expanded. And the job of the architects is just doing a nice building to whatever society that is there. And that's one way of seeing it. But there's other ways that maybe are a little bit more capable to track what is the role of architecture in making societies through a building like this. This is the first image that was produced to conceptualize this building. It was not designed by Raphael Vignoli. It was not designed by Deborah Berg, who are officially named as the architects of the 432 Park Avenue building. But this was an image that was designed by art director Matthew Bannister. Matthew Bannister is an architect that is the founder and CEO of D-Box. D-Box is an office, for those that are not familiar with it, of architectural branding. He was hired by Harry Marklow, the developer of 432, to create a concept that would attract capital and that could basically allow to increase and to multiply by 5 the price of real estate in New York. And this is the first image that was produced, which is owning the view. By owning an apartment, you own the view. But not any view. As you see, a view that looks like a painting, a view that is valuable, that stabilizes value, as a Van Gogh would stabilize value. This flamboyant owner owns the landscape, owns the exterior by owning the interior. This is what basically composes 432, a repetition of this window, this square window. And that, of course, comes with a history, the history of basically the moment in which New York, Manhattan, could no longer compete with Elizabeth. In the 1970s, with the Vietnam War, the ship containers were standardized, and basically New York didn't have the capacity to introduce the infrastructures for the tracks to relate to the harbor. This basically prompted the growth of Elizabeth as the new harbor that would void the economy of Manhattan. Since then, since the 70s, all the mayors of New York have been struggling to find an economy for the city, and real estate was always the answer. When Michael Bloomberg would say that attracting billionaires could be a godsend, was just replicating a series of experiments that progressively have turned real estate as the real industry of New York. But that's something that required the collaboration of many forms of design. Many forms of design that probably all of you are familiar with, that are things that we do as architects, or at least we work in collaboration with others that do these kind of designs. For instance, allowed in New York City, a legislation, a policy that would allow to buy real estate properties with LLC sold companies, making it impossible to track who's the actual owner of properties like the one in 432. The second is to create tax exemptions for those that could buy high-end properties. The third one is basically to create a whole network of tax havens that could basically allow to have tax havens not in, let's say, distant locations in the tropics, but actually in all the major cities where economy is growing. And we see that basically when the Panama Papers or the Paradise Paper were released, even newspapers like The Guardian would represent the role of architecture in creating tax havens as something that could be in distant locations, an architecture of colonial tiny white houses that could be in Caribbean islands. But actually, when we see the struggles of the European Union to define what a tax haven is, it basically in 2015 came to mean that Switzerland, Hong Kong, USA, Singapore, Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, Lebanon, Germany, Emirates, Japan, Macau, Panama, Marshall, United Kingdom, Jersey, Malaysia, Turkey, Austria, Brazil, Malta, Uruguay, Canada, Russia, basically every single country, the Netherlands, of course, Israel, Chile, Belgium, Ireland, you know, all of them were basically hosting and incorporating in their cities forms for architecture to become a good place, a good mediator for tax evasion. And that's something that when it comes to see what is the form of that, what is the materiality of that, it probably looks like this. But let's go more in detail with the architecture. Matthew Bannister studied at Princeton. He's a Princeton graduate. He was studying there at the time that Beatriz Colomina was doing the Sex and Architecture Symposia. He collaborated with Joel Sander in one of the first books on sex and architecture and queerness. When we look at the image that he produced, it's literally coming from a knowledge that was produced in the field of architecture in the 1990s. This is an image that was produced in Queens in Silvercat Studios. It was basically on a chroma, and then it was rendered on top of the green surface, but the actors were there. This is Christina Makowski. She was selected among more than 400 candidates, female models. She's a Sport Illustrated model. She was well known in the US at the time. She's wearing this Armani shirtless tuxedo that for those that are familiar with the culture of Instagram, probably it's already sounding very familiar. This is one of the most famous, most successful images in the history of Instagram, which is the Kim Kardashian Lanvin shirtless tuxedo that was imitated, of course, in an Armani version, which is much more respectable. And but if we could go to the backwards, what we see here, so basically we see like there's this sexualized person that was already tested in Instagram as successful for international audiences. And what we see in the background is 3 guys, and 2 of them are actors, and there's one that is not a professional actor. Okay, who would you guess that is the, do you want to guess who's not a professional actor? Who would you say? Who would you say, for instance, that is not a professional actor? Is the chubby guy. The chubby guy is actually a businessman from New Jersey, very close to Harry Marlowe. And he was brought there. He's kind of a non-canonically handsome guy, let's put it this way. And that was selected because he would make it plausible. He would make it realistic. And actually the idea, when I interview Matthew Banis, I interviewed him several times about this particular image. He mentioned, basically you see Russian guys in the Hilton Hotel opening their iPads and looking at this image, and they will immediately identify with this guy and think that they will have sex with a woman like this if they buy an apartment in 432. That is kind of the situation that was produced here. This is a device to sexualize the apartment, so the possibilities to attract buyers can be maximized. What is important for me is not only this sexualized aspect of the image, but actually that the detailing of the building was defined here, was selected here. When you see, for instance, the idea of there's no assemblage, that the glass is presented without mullions, that the Carrara marble would directly touch the wall in that way without an edge, that there would be this very wide, very pale wooden flooring with this kind of traditional New York patterns. All these decisions were not taken by Raphael Vignoli, neither by Deborah Berg, but they were taken by Matthew Bannister as part of this sexualizing strategy of the apartments. What we see here is these materials becoming also sexual to a certain extent. And when we look through these windows, what is that we see? We basically see, we don't see the skyline of New York that much, actually. If you look at these images, you can probably find this installation that was done by covering even the skyline from these windows. What we see here is the sky, and that's not by accident. The sky is the main actor. This is the asset. That is what, remember, what was the conceptual image of 432, the sky. By owning the interior, you could own the sky. This image that we saw before. But that is very much constructed through architectural detailing. These windows do not open. They're just this excelled glass, ultra-clear glass, produced in Austria and shipped all the way to New York, that has the capacity to polarize and to maximize the spectrum, the part of the spectrum of the natural light of the blue colors. So basically, this glass makes the sky look bluer. And that is something that it's produced by architectural detailing. But making it look bluer, of course, is part of the strategy to own not any sky, but a valuable sky that it's remove NOx in it. This is the kind of glass that we see here, ultra-clear glass. Not any glass, a glass that is basically what power is encapsulated in now. Apple stores, Mount Sinai hospitals, high-end Cornell University infrastructures, they're all wrapped in ultra-clear glass. Bentley cars, they all basically, contemporary power is encapsulated in ultra-clear glass. Ultra-clear glass has very low iron in it, or iron oxide in it. It is produced out of the silica that is extracted in Ottawa. It was first developed the first architectural building in which it was installed was the Falling Water House by Miss Van der Rohe. Actually, that was by Frank Lloyd Wright. Actually, it was the owner of the Kaufman family was one of the families that was developing ultra-clear glass as a material for commercial spaces windows. And it was very much dependent on the extraction of a very white kind of silica that can be found in a few places in the world, one of them, Ottawa, Illinois. This is what it looks like, and what is very interesting is that this was a very unique ecosystem for Native Americans because silica is so porous when it's in its formation, in its stone formations. It allows water to flow through it, and basically by doing that, it produces ecosystems that are populated by a huge diversity of both plants and animals. And that was considered like a sacred place for hunting by many Native American tribes that basically could go hunting there in a practice that was regulated collectively, so the sustainability of these ecosystems could endure in time. How far are we from this, right? Extracting this and producing a glass that is so invisible that can produce and allows to filter the sky so it can be owned and becomes a place to launder money is something that gives a huge distance from this culture of mutual care probably to something that probably is a culture of extraction where we are probably at the end of it and watching how it cracks. This is Ottawa. This is where the silica is extracted. This is basically the kind of landscape that is produced out of the extraction of silica. This is what it looks like. Silica is incredibly strong. It's very strong but rounded. That means that it's not very deformable and that you can accumulate a huge amount of silica, a column of silica that goes 3 miles down and still keeps the holes in between the different particles, allowing the gas, the air, to flow through it. The water in these formations that produce the rich ecosystems that Native Americans regulated, but also fracking and many other things. This is a piece of glass looking at the sky in 432 with a marble slab without architectural assemblage in it. This is the bathroom with another piece of ultra-clear glass. This is another part, basically. And this is ultra-clear glass being produced. It requires 73, it multiplies, or it increases 73% the amount of energy that is needed to be produced compared to an ordinary glass, and is directly connected. And the fuel, what makes it possible to produce ultra-clear glass around the world is mostly the availability of natural gas, something that is sadly in the news every day these days, right? We know what it means to extract gas and to move gas around the world. But this is also what it means. 30,000 miles of polluted aquifers in Susquehanna Valley, the Marcellus Shale, that started to be exploited intensively in the 1930s after the crash, and that was directly connected to the development of ultra-clear glass in the first place in Pittsburgh and to its entire development. Without natural gas in Susquehanna, in the Marcellus Shale, there's no ultra-clear glass. Their history are directly connected. But of course, natural gas means polluted water and polluted air in Susquehanna Valley. All this is kind of the pollutants that are the increase of pollutants that means to use ultra-clear glass. And surprisingly, due to the way that the LEED certificate is developed as something that basically champions innovation, only by using ultra-clear glass that, as I said, is directly connected to a huge increase in emissions and pollution, you get 2 LEED points. What I'm trying to say is that architectural detailing is a form of socio-territorial recomposition. And it's probably the time to go back to the fundamental ideology that is behind the detailing that architecture does to understand how deeply architecture is entangled with political struggle. Politics that are being redefined now in facing urgent defiance, like climate change, inequality, migrations around the world, war for resources. All that is probably something that it's on the table of architecture. And there's a great opportunity also for architecture to think detailing differently, to think of it differently. And that's what I'm trying to do. If we look at this, it's not only about detailing, it's also about larger scales. In 2011, Michael Bloomberg, as part of this strategy to attract billionaires and investment, approved the Clean Heat Act. The Clean Heat Act came with the Clean Heat project that moved public funding to, in 1 year, prompt a huge transformation of the way heating would be produced in New York, moving a large percentage of boilers in the city from coal and oil to natural gas. The reason why this would happen is that gas would not pollute that much in the place where it is burned, but in the place where it is extracted. And by doing that, basically, the pollution would move. That actually came, this is the Clean Heat project. This actually coincided in a 2-year period with the, and this is of course all coming with very good intentions, Cuomo's ban on horizontal fracking. Of course, that came with the raising awareness on the importance of the quality of air and water, but also came with the need to increase the rentals and the real estate value in a city like New York that's so much dependent financially from real estate. I mean, nothing to complain about banning fracking anywhere, but these combined, these politics combined, resulted in Susquehanna Valley getting all the pollution that was removed from New York. There's a number of organizations that we've been collaborating in the last 15 years, tracking this evolution and of toxicity in New York. And basically, you see here in 2011, the moment in which basically Clean Heat project was developed in New York, how the NOx, the presence of NOx in Susquehanna Valley increased immediately. There was an immediate effect in reducing the pollution in New York, immediately translated in NOx emerging in Susquehanna. What is very surprising for me, or kind of intriguing, why there's this coincidence that actually silica, the very silica that is produced in Ottawa, extracted in Ottawa to produce ultra-clear glass, is exactly the one that is used to fill up the fracking drills, the fracking wells in Susquehanna. Due to the resistance of the kind of rigidity of these particles, it allows to accumulate more than 3 miles down a column of silica that still allows the gas to be channeled up and connected to the pipelines. So what is very, very kind of, let's say like a weird coincidence, is that the same material that requires the gas is introduced there to allow the gas to flow to the places where, to the ovens where the glass is melted. But this is what a fracking well looks like. That's what is weird, right? It doesn't look like a dirty place. It doesn't look like a place where so much damage is happening. It doesn't tell the story. It doesn't allow to unblack box what is going on there. All this is landscaped by Cabot Gas Company, so that if you drive through this, you would never understand the complexity of what is happening there. That is another thing that for me it's very interesting about this architecture. The architecture that high accuracy lives through is an architecture that is very similar to the one of the Barcelona Pavilion. It's one that is based on the possibility of invisibilizing a big part of what is crucial for the politics that we're part of. So we cannot engage critically with a reality like this because it's literally invisible, ultra clear invisible. All this is as invisible as the Catna Nebula. These cosmopolitical compositions that we live by are not something that we can fill through architectural or through architectural tools that were developed in the 19th and the 20th century. This is the way that basically fracking manifests to those that live there. It really manifests like a ghost. They can burn the water, many of them, because the aquifers get polluted with methane as they get mixed with the gas that is extracted through the pipes, so through the walls. So it becomes kind of a myth. A myth that means that there's something mixing in the water, but no one can see what's happening there, maybe 7 miles from where they are. But this is how investors can see this. For those of you that have predicts, how many people have predicts in their phones for like mineral assets investment? Do you know it? You have it. Okay. I mean, last year there were more employees, more people working for predicts than for Google. So this is a huge industry that is producing images of mineral assets, and probably none of us have them, or only you have them, right? So that's kind of the mystery. There's a big part of our society that is totally invisible for all of us, and it's the one that is where many of the decisions are made. So this is the way that this is what our world looks like. This is the basement of our Barcelona Pavilion. This is actually the technology that allows us to make decisions on it. This is the way that people have access to it. You can basically change the price a little bit, right? So this is basically the divide that we live through. This is our Barcelona Pavilion somehow. Like on the top, you see all these people living in this lotting. Down there, we see the assets, and that's directly connected. This is the way that is consolidated by landman companies that are buying properties, the mineral rights of all these tiny properties, and consolidated in a 10-year period. But this is directly connected to this. And this is what, for me, is the struggle of architecture now. How do we operate in these complex systems of connections? How do we make sense of them? How do we take decisions or make decisions at the scale of a class that allowed us to intervene the complex relationships that are brought here? For me, this is one of the biggest challenges that we have. And of course, there's a number of people that are discussing scale as the fundamental question for politics now. If we want to have a relevance in the making of contemporary politics, we need to develop tools for this. And of course, this is difficult. This is what I've been telling you. It's the result of a long research that we've been doing in my office on transcalarities, and that is part of this book. But of course, we're not only working on this, we're trying to do experiments in which we can approach tiny pieces of these conglomerates of relationships. This is, for instance, maybe you can play it. This is, for instance, something. Okay, this is fracking. This is a reconstruction of what fracking means. You can hear now pumping. Gas starts to flow. Can you hear the gas? But there's still pressure. The gas is increasing. Can you hear the dun, dun? That's the pumping. Okay. This is a work that is called Being Silica. It's a work that we did. It's a performative work that we developed in a number of years, over a period of 10 years, and that we presented last year on the top of the Rockefeller Center. I would say that it's an architectural project. It's a project that allows, or that is intended to allow to fill in New York City the expanded footprint of the making of the city. What it means to fill, basically, or what bodily fill, what is the source of the energy that is consuming the city. And this is something that probably it's going back to the idea of bodied architecture. How can we use our body as the medium that allowed us to feel critically the extension of the buildings, the materials, the daily performances our lives depend on. Feeling it is quite important. Sensing it is crucial. Architecture is permanently allowed us to sense things. It allowed us to know that the exit is there, to sense where the exit is. It allowed us to see what is out there. But we need probably a different sensitivity, a sensitivity that is connected to what is critical to us now. This is a series of experiments that we're doing that is approaching ways for our bodies to become capable of sensing the realities that are so critical to us. I'm going to go now to a battery of projects. This is a very different project that we developed also in New York that is called Cosmo. A big part of what makes it possible, this reality, is the notion that coexisting with toxicity is undesirable. What we did here, it's a prototype of what would it be to coexist with the toxicity that is connected to our daily life. What we did here is a pipe system that would treat wastewater locally. And we place it at the center, one of the centers of the culture kind of experimentation in New York, the MoMA PS1 in Queens. This is a device that is using the tradition of the 1960s eco machines to create a garden that is actually taking water directly from the sewage system, whereas you know in New York the sewage system is mixing fecal matter with rainwater, and basically over a period of 2 weeks, making it circulate from a series of ecosystems that are engineered so that the water becomes drinkable. This is actually something that we developed with a number of engineers and activists from different contexts, and that was supported by the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. But our intention was to create a demonstrative device that could have the possibility of inject or insert a different notion of what is desirable, and to allow for people to experience what it means to coexist with their own shit in a way, and how enjoyable that could be. This became also the location where many parties and concerts were organized. And the idea behind this architecture is that architecture can mediate in an evolution in the way desire is projected. In the same way that Matthew Bannister was making it desirable, these apartments, we were developing this idea that coexisting with toxicity is not something that should remove value, but rather to create something that could be enjoyable. And the way we did it is this prototype that would be open source and that would allow anyone to basically replicate the technology or the systems, which were very basic, that were mobilized so that they could do it elsewhere. There's a number of people that actually develop gardens like this. This is a different project that also is operating in this Transscalar kind of methodology, and it's the transformation of San Lorenzo Church in Venice. This was a project that we did for TBA 21, and that is being developed now, being constructed now, that basically consisted on creating an embassy of the large ocean, a space that would allow for humans to sense many of the presences in the ocean that are under discussion now, and to provide a parliament of the ocean that could be in itself convening not only humans, but allowed into a larger presence of diversified actors that are present in a larger scale, but that could be gathered at the smaller scale of the building, but also to use sensing technology, distance sensing technology, to renovate this notion of what the domes are, to produce this presence of realities that are being discussed now by humans with regards to more than human forms of life, and that could be basically bringing together the policymakers, artists, technology developers, and activists in a chamber where basically the realities, the life, the senses of ecosystems around the world would be brought through the mediation of technologically digitally developed interfaces. This is something that TBA 21 is developing now, or we are developing with them, and they have boats in different parts of the world that are collecting data and sensing data in real time, and that information is meant to be made accessible here. Another project that is aligned with this idea that at the scale of buildings we can produce transformations in larger ecosystems is this school that we're building now in Madrid, which is Regio School. Regio School is in the middle of a very fragile ecosystem or landscape, which is the ecosystem of San Pinar de los Reyes. Very fragile because it's basically surrounded by urbanized areas. And what we're doing is basically a cauldron where all the different forms of these ecosystems can be nurtured by a building and protected by a building. In the ideology of John Dewey and the Reggio Emilia methodology, basically, the idea is that the daily experience of going through these ecosystems that are protected and preserved by the building itself could actually become the very element of education. So learning by basically going through the building and coexisting with these fragments of ecosystems that are connected with large ecosystems that require to be taken care of and nurtured. The building itself becomes then a repository, kind of a stacking of different ecosystems that are basically finding different climates within the building that allow to mediate in a process of preservation of them. This is something that we're doing in collaboration with the Autónoma University in Madrid, and it's basically making the building become a little bit of a life support system for some of these ecosystems that, being connected with the large ones, are contributing to their preservation. This is where it is now. This is another project that is connected to the previous one. This is a photograph from the 1940s of Molina de Segura. It's a landscape in southern Spain, in Murcia. What we see here is a landscape that is shaped by all these veins of deep carvings. The carving is the result, of course, of water. It's a very dry ecosystem, and when it rains very fast, and it produces this erosion that results in these veins within the landscape. But this is a photograph of now. As you see, the urbanization of this landscape basically consisted in flattening the orography and eliminating all these depressions. So basically, this ecosystem became flat and was developed through a continuous a grid, or sort of continuous grid. What is most critical is that by doing that, all these veins where biodiversity would accumulate in the course of water was eliminated. This is what some of these veins look like now, and the ones that exist. You see them during the time that it's water in them, and this is what they look like. I mean, they look like very humble ecosystems, but they're incredibly important in a landscape that is mostly a desert. But the fact is that they've disappeared in a place like Molina de Segura, where we were asked to build this small house. What we did here is basically identify that it was a tiny piece of these depressions, of these ramblas, and we constructed the house around it and used the house as a life support system that would create a tiny node of a rambla that could be preserved. The water that comes from the gray water that is recycled from the showers of the house is actually creating, you see this climatic crown around this rambla that is basically spread, creating an artificial climate when the sensors that are placed on the earth are indicating that the life in the rambla is jeopardized. And that, for me, it's a very humble experiment that allows to think, what is the way that there could be a collaboration that is not really about reconstructing what was lost, but probably something that could be the creation of a new alliance between architecture and the landscape that somehow would make it possible to restitute, or at least repair to a tiny extent, a big part of the biodiversity that was lost. But as you see, this is an architecture that operates with the larger scale, and as such, this is another demonstrative device that it's meant to be an element of activism. We're organizing meetings with the neighbors here so that all of them can develop, again, like with Cosmo, projects of protecting their tiny ramblas. Of course, you have to understand this in the context of Murcia political ecosystem, where there's no possibility of a larger scale coordination. where the far right is governing for more than 50 years, and it's impossible, and they have this culture of total exploitation of the land that is empowering the entire territory. But what is behind here is also the possibility of thinking of architecture as an element of trans-species realliance. And the last point that I would like to discuss today is this one that is very connected to what we're reading in the front page of the newspapers every day, which is a competition that we won a year ago to do the Babin Museum of Holocaust, the Museum of Memory and Oblivion. Babin Yar is the location where in 3 days the Nazi forces killed more than 33,000 people. Initially, people with mental diseases, but also very rapidly also Romani, Jewish, queer, people with disabilities, to a total number of more than 100,000 people in a 2-year period. And this is in Ukraine, of course, in Kyiv. And it's directly connected to what happens now. So this is basically the way Ukraine, it's what is happening now. It's coming from a discussion about the control on transitioning and gas that is extracted in different places, but is going to a certain extent through Ukraine, and the way that basically this is also translated in a way to reconstruct history. The goal of invading Ukraine the goal of invading there's something wrong here, right? The goal of invading Ukraine to protect the people that are subjected to abuse, genocide from the Kyiv regime, and to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. This is the way Vladimir Putin explained actually a few days ago on February 24th, what is actually what he was doing. And that is exactly why also Babin Yar was one of the first places that was bombed, because Babin Yar is exactly explaining what were the efforts of Ukraine to make the history of what happened with the Nazi regime basically in Ukraine visible and sensible to everyone. And when we look at and our project was very much, again, about looking at the way the very tiny aspects of the materiality of this place are entangled with its history, with a history of violence, a history of crime, a history of tragedy. When we look at all these things, the town mark, the way the landscape is carved, the presence of these bricks, each of these photographs are telling a big part of the story of why and how these 100,000 people were killed here in Babin Yar. This is, for instance, the excavation of some of the corpses that were buried here. The topography was transformed and was used so that the entire landscape could work as a killing machine, where those that were being killed would basically work to facilitate that others could be killed before them, and those that were basically there waiting to be killed would never perceive who was being killed. And that use of the design of the landscape as a tool to kill and to make the crime of killing disappear, it's still there. The second thing is that and that's something that the Babin Yar Foundation has been doing in association with a number of botanists and biologists and a large team of people, and that we're working with now. Basically, all these species that we can find here are actually telling the story of the presence of human remains. These are species that can survive and can live in the high presence of human debris. And actually, even the presence of trees can tell of when is the moment that this happened. The trees that were removed to burn the corpses before they were spread in the land are actually basically only reappearing after a number of years, after 25 years following the burning and the spread of the ashes on the land. And basically, by looking at the trees and the composition of the trees, materially, the history of the killing and the massacres that happen here can be read. And even the presence of animals, there are certain animals that would never come back here because of the high presence of ashes in the soil. And there's others that actually would be attracted by those presence of human remains here. So what all this comes to tell, basically, is that the materiality of a place that, like Babin Yar, that result from both the design of a killing machine and the actual performance of killing, those material designs are basically still there and are shaping the forms of life that remain here, like in the case of the Catna Nebula. This cosmopolitical assemblage is containing the history of Babin Yar, but it's something that we cannot perceive. And what our project it's doing is actually creating an architecture that it's facilitating an observatory for many different disciplines to work on this. What we basically propose in the competition that allowed us to win this museum and research center is to expand the building to comprise and to create an observatory of the entire band where the massacre was materially registered. Go down to the basement, let's say, and climb up to the sky, to the earth, where the particles and the effect of the killing is still manifesting through the trees. The building, this museum and research center is to be hosted in the transformed former administration building of the former Jewish cemetery. What we propose basically is to raise the roof 20 meters and to take the basement down 10 meters to comprise the entire section of the ecosystem that would still contain the material remains and the evidences and the forms of life that result from the massacre. And by using very simple engineering devices to move things, expand and open the building so that the building could basically manifest and become an observatory of the material cosmopolitical composition that contains a history that is so important to tell, because it's actually the only way to respond to the arguments that Putin is using now to attack Ukraine. This is the upper part. This is something that we're also working with Inés Weissman and a number of people, and Nick Axel and Marina Otero, many of them based actually in the Netherlands, Nick Axel and Marina Otero at the Hetny Institute. And this is the upper part, which is an observatory of the Earth Holocaust ecosystems of Babin Yar, and going down to the soil ecosystems and the way that materially the archive and still register and makes vivid this reality. So this is what I would like to present today. I believe that we're in a crucial moment in which architecture is in the middle of a huge number of political agendas. But also it's a moment in which probably we need to readjust our tools and to understand that architecture is collectively produced, is operating across scales, it's intersectional in the way that many different realities are relating to each other through architecture. It's also something that is difficult, that is not easy to do, and that we probably required to work together for a long time in big institutions, in laboratories, across disciplines to make a shift. But the shift that is needed if we want architecture to be relevant in issues like inequality, climate, intersecting societal divides, war, ways to deal with energy, the ways to socialize and to operate international with innovation and with the responses to many of the crises that can come from design and technology development. But all that somehow requires new politics for architecture, new politics that are intersectional, probably relational, transscalar, and transmaterial. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for taking us on this transscalar journey. I believe that there are some questions. If people could walk to the microphone, and if you're going to come down the stairs, please do it gracefully because the sound reverberates.
Hi. Thank you, Andrés, for showing us for uncovering all these many things for us.
Please speak into the microphone, Raymond.
You got it, Solomon. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. Well, Yeah, thank you again for uncovering all these different things for us tonight. And I suppose with this collage of images behind you now, perhaps this is more of a comment than a question, but you started off with uncovering, let's say, a side of a canonical modernist work, a side that we're all very unfamiliar with. And I suppose to people in this room tonight, this perhaps is the most shocking of all. But then as you go through the other projects, all uncovering things such as, is it really that bad to live with toxicity? Or the Las Ramblas, where are they? Let's protect it. I suppose to us in this room, this is the most, what's the word? Familiar and recognizable. And I wonder, the other projects, have you ever talked about them in this way to non-architectural groups? That's not actually a question. I suppose I wonder if you ever wonder about talking about these things to non-architects, non-designers in this way as a means of, let's say, political, well, it's the Office for Political Innovation, right? As a means of political outreach and things like that.
Yeah, that's an incredibly important question. Thank you for asking. Yeah, I think we have to, as architects, right, we need to be able to convey to non-architects, and actually not only to talk and then basically they understand it, but actually working together with them. All the works that I presented today are the result of collaboration with people from many different disciplines. And that's something that for me is crucial, because the kind of relevance of architecture does not depend on architecture kind of forcing or kind of creating a fortress around it and having its own conversations, but being confident in understanding that the very specificity of architecture is relevant to others. For me, what is important is that by looking at the ultra-clear glass, that we're all experts on it. We can discuss mullions for hours, right? All of us. We can discuss the Barcelona Pavilion for hours. But we can get to a level of detail that is very relevant to others. And that's for me what is important. I remember like 20 years ago, when architects talk about politics, it was like not talking about architecture, but kind of proclaiming things that anyone could say. My intention when we founded the Office for Political Innovation, our intention was actually not to do that, not to talk politics as something that was external to architecture and just use a speaker. I'm an architect, but I'm going to talk about politics like anyone would do. My intention is identify how the specificity of architecture activates forms of politics that we can be experts on, and we can then allow others to have access to them. So I'm interested on the politics of architectural detailing, not about any politics. I mean, as a citizen, I'm interested on voting and discussing, and but as an architect, my interest is to understand what it means to remove the mullion in a window, what it means to come with marble and glass, and how that is political. And in order to do that, we have to mobilize a knowledge that we can only have. No other disciplines can have it. But by doing that, we have the capacity to work with others. And that's what, for me, it's very important to claim very clearly. It's not the job of architects to be political, as anyone else could be political. It's our job to be political through the materiality, the spatial conditions, the assemblage, the culture of technology, the culture of production, those that are the specific means of architecture. And that's why I believe that your question is very important, because by doing that, actually, our voice is much more important to others, and that allows us to work with others from other fields.
I see. Thank you. Very inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, thanks for your lecture. What I felt was really interesting to see in the Barcelona Pavilion project is also the contrasting colors, which happens through bringing out these objects into the Barcelona Pavilion. And then throughout, when there was also architectural representation on screen, we saw, or I saw, some very colorful drawings, but then at the same time, there was one of the drawings, I forgot the project now, which was mostly black, so more traditional, I guess. And this is maybe also a personal thing, but probably also for others, like trying to move away from black and white drawings. What is your take on this?
Yeah. I think of drawings as tools of representation, but when I say representation, I don't mean kind of the mirroring of a reality. When I talk of representation, I talk of representation like in a parliament, like a way to bring representatives of different realities to the table where the decisions are made. And for me, the importance of drawing the trees and the soil and the water and the animals in these drawings is because they are part of those societies that are being re-articulated in these projects. So for me, drawing is a crucial aspect of the political action of architecture. And that's something that I think that we have, I would say that the way that I relate to architecture is very orthodox, very disciplinary. I'm interested in section plans, I'm interested in site plans, I'm interested in, you know, I'm not into kind of moving away from our discipline, because I don't think we have exhausted yet the tools that we have, but we have to probably use them differently. And that's what I'm interested on. So what I saw today is section plans, floor plans, photographs, axonometrics, things that allowed us to bring together. You remember that one axonometric, for instance, of the school that has a section of the soil. That was crucial because the soil there changes everything. Basically what can grow there depends very much on the stratum of the soil. So we work with geologists, identifying all the layers and representing them, because they are crucial in the making of many decisions that came afterwards, in the same way that we brought the trees, the actual trees. The trees that you see there, to a big extent, are trees that were already in the site and that we are taking away from during the building site process and bringing back to the building afterwards. So they need to be preserved, and in order to make it happen, we have to draw them, to catalog them, to give them a number, to measure them, to make sure that they are in the budget. So there's a money that is allocated in bringing them back afterwards. You know, all these are crucial elements that can only happen if we introduce them in the documents. So I think of the drawings as representational, but not representational as a depiction, but rather as a parliament of all those voices that need to be rearticulated. And I think with that perspective, we treasure tools that are very important in our discipline that we should not kind of throw off too early.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the lecture. You mentioned a lot of times the word parliament, so I'm wondering if there is any clear connection with the Parliament of Things of Bruno Latour.
Yeah,
In general, I mean, the question is, are we as architects, I mean, is our responsibility to build this kind of parliaments, and within these parliaments, who's going to speak for the things? Who's the ambassador of things? Who's the spoken person?
For the faith?
The spoken person of who is representing the things.
The things,
in the
yeah,
parliament.
of course, yeah.
Us, the scientists, people?
Yeah, that's an incredibly good question. I mean, in a way, I must very clearly state that the context of the STAs, the studies of science, society, and technology, have been crucial for me. And we've discussed many about STS, right, in the past also as well, together. And the relationship with Bruno Latour has been very close in my practice. We developed together a project, Superpowers of 10, that was part of that is part of his book Reset Modernity, and I really think that he's an important person. But not only him, the entire context of the STS and Norge Mares, Albena Janeva, Andrew Berry, Fabian Muniesa, Michael Guggenheim. Like there's a context of the STS that I think are incredibly important for contemporary thinking and politics and technology. I must say that also it's very important to acknowledge that our work and the work of other architects have been incredibly also influential to the development of the STS. And that's something very unique, that basically one of the leading forms of conceptual innovation, it's very much coming also and in conversation with architectural thinking. And I think this needs to be said because in a way often architects, we believe that we just have to absorb knowledge from other disciplines. I don't think it's the case. The case is that we also have a knowledge that is very useful for others, so it's more like a conversation where there's a collaboration, and I think that it's important that we feel very confident about this. You mentioned the Parliament of Things, and the Parliament of Things is a very important notion that was very, very important in the 2000s, around the 2005, with making things public in ZKM, and the idea that there could be a symmetry between humans and non-humans. I think that this is the entire kind of culture of the assemblage and the importance of understanding that any technological assemblage requires and implies a political assembly. It's totally transformed architecture. We cannot think of assemblages without assemblies now. So and that's why I'm so interested in architectural detailing, but not in the way Ford would discuss architectural detailing. I'm not interested in elegant detailing. I'm interested in understanding that any detailing is an assemblage that implies political action, that contains political action, that creates hierarchies, that redistributes toxicity, for instance. And that's what, for me, comes from the Parliament of Things. This idea that any composition is both technological and political. In my opinion, and that's at least my way of working, architects work technopolitically, not only technologically. And that's crucial. But that is very important to claim because it doesn't mean that politics are immaterial. Politics are incredibly material. In the same way that we cannot separate politics from, the same way that we cannot claim that technology is something that has its own course and that could cater to whatever society. It has ideology, it has political action, it has an agency in itself. In the same way, we cannot be happy with the idea that politics can be done immaterially. That's not going to happen. Politics require the mobilization of architecture. And that's a notion of technopolitics that I think that are shaping the action of at least what I'm interested on, what I'm doing.
Hello. So my question is a bit of a follow-up to the previous two. It combines a bit the two in the sense that, as you were saying, the projects are politically heavy and they're of very strong activist nature. And I was curious as to how you use these visuals, which are very complex and very layered, to communicate your ideas beyond installations and beyond the built environment.
Yeah.
Because who are the drawings targeted to, if
Yeah.
that makes sense?
It's interesting because our work is circulated more in non-architectural circles than in architectural circles. I must say this, for instance, the work being Silica, it was published in many magazines that basically were not architectural. And I don't remember that it was ever published in an architectural magazine. So, and that was a work that was, for me, intrinsically architectural. It's something that could not come from any other form of knowledge. It could not come from sociology. It could not come from political sciences. It could not come from, definitely it could not come from engineering, because it's not only about engineering, it's really intersecting societal relationships and many other things. And but what is interesting is that that was a piece that was circulating broadly in general media. So this is to say basically that the efforts that we've made to narrate how architecture is entangled with larger stories that affect everyone have been actually allowing us to gain an audience beyond the, let's say, the circles of architecture. But at the same time, to go back to architecture and then find other methodologies to work through design and to do architectural pedagogy, to discuss architecture, to look at the architecture of the past and understand conflicts that basically were not possible to explain before. And I think that that's something that, in my opinion, is incredibly valuable for us. how to produce, and not only communication, you use the term communication. For me, communication is good, but it refers to an idea that we relate to each other through media. And I think the notion of media is a little bit old now. We don't watch TV like that. We are TV now. So we breathe TV, or Instagram, or TikTok, or, we're media. Our bodies, I get, and everyone gets messages, right, from their doctors all the time. We change things. Many people have Peloton, and is running or cycling according to a program and looking at other people. We don't watch TV. We don't read newspapers. We are immersed in a reality, and our bodies are part of that reality. We are a medium, and we're part of a transmedium reality. And I think that's a very fundamental question. That's why my interest is not about communicating, but about allowing to collectively sense or contributing to expand our capacity to sense the complexity of contemporary life. Attuning. I think that we don't communicate, we attune with reality differently. And I think that's a crucial, that already was in Marshall McLuhan. You remember that Marshall McLuhan said, the real communication is environmentalized. If you know that there's a message, there's no longer good communication. The good communication is when it's environmentalized, you don't see it. It's like the water of a fish that doesn't see the water. It's breathing the water. The water is constituting the fish, right? The same way. We did this biennale in Shanghai, Bodies of Water, looking at the way basically through COVID, there's no difference between the air between us and us. The air became yourself, right? You're the air that comes to your lungs and becomes part of your blood and circulates, and that air comes from you to the person next to you, and you are connected through the air, and you're the air. So we live in a medium. We live as medium. And for me, that's totally different to the idea of media that is part of the past for me now. But it's already contained in many of the theorists of media that developed the kind of idea of media, right?
Hi, thank you for your inspiring lecture. I especially enjoyed an image you showed from the pavilion where you have the background of the marble with this woman's sculpture on the left and then the vacuum cleaner in the front, almost, well, I assume it's intentionally juxtaposed next to it. And then the representation collage of the Reggio School seemed pretty, a little bit similar to that idea of bringing the basement into the drawing and putting all the artifacts and elements together. And so the idea of image and the architecture, the image that architecture, modernist architecture tried to portray versus what the image that you and the firm produce today. Do you consider the idea of image still a very strong, or I don't know if strong of course, but is that supposed to be a critique or a counter image to modernist movement, or a non-romantic image?
That's a very good question. Thank you for that question. In a way, it is an image, right? Because you see that image and there's something that is somehow felt immediately, right? The tension between the two places and kind of colliding, right? But it was also a piece of reality. And that's something that shows the power of architecture. Those vacuum cleaners were used. So basically, they would become part of the pavilion. And the people that were using them were the cleaning staff, right? Like the people that were working in cleaning endeavors. They would take the vacuum cleaner every day, and they would take it from the installation and start kind of vacuum cleaning everything, because the marble, the travertine, has the holes open, right? It was not filled with resin, because that was the kind of taste of Mies van der Rohe that the people that reconstructed it could identify in the photographs. So, but that means that the water gets in it, and with water comes mud, and then moss grows in it. and that destroys the marble. So the travertines, the broken travertines that you see in the photograph in the basement are broken because basically the holes are open, the water gets in there, and plants grow. So in order, like in the same way the Catna Nebula is removing the mice, the cleaning staff in the pavilion are vacuum cleaning every day the holes. So there's not mud in them, there's no water in them. So imagine that is something that they need to do before the visitors arrive, because no one wants the visitors to know that that requires so many efforts. Everyone wants to see the pavilion as an easy to maintain thing, a natural thing that doesn't require maintenance, actually. So they have to do it at 7 in the morning before the visitors arrive. But the thing is that by having the vacuum cleaners there as part of the exhibition, they take them, they dismount the exhibition. When the visitors came, actually, they would see them putting them back. That was very, very interesting, because the act of placing the machines back there became or made visible the work that these people were doing. They became part of the visibility of the pavilion. And that for me was crucial, was very good. It was very good because by changing the place of things in the building, the entire societal composition was transformed. But not only as an image, of course as an image because it was photographed, and that image is in many places, but also as a piece of reality that was experienced as a daily reality for those that were visiting and being part of the pavilion during those days. So the reassemblage was a piece of reality for a while. But then it had many, many other lives. And that's what is interesting for me, that it could also transfer to other places, and then other things happen. And I could tell you many stories of the impact of this. This work is now in the Art Institute of Chicago. It's part of the permanent exhibition. But it was there because basically Chicago has this fetishized relationship with mesh. And by bringing this work there, there was a huge discussion about what to do with how to maintain the buildings of mesh in the city, in Chicago. So there's many things that happened that followed this.
Hi, I'm Christy. I'm from Brazil. Thank you for your lecture. It was very interesting and fast-paced. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the natural gas, which is such a big topic today with everything that is happening, and mainly in the Netherlands, which is going over the top.
Of course.
So all in parallel, knowing that the gas, natural gas is a finite resource, and then you can impact also the place where you are extracting, causing like several potential damage to this area. I wanted to know, like we as human beings, we can also produce our own natural gases, and we can implement that in cities. And even that's not enough for entire city to supply, we can also reduce the amount of gas extraction that you can have. How do you, in your projects, could convey this information? How do we, as architects, can position ourselves and share this information, and because this is it's a deeper structure change that demands. So how do we architects can take a position on that and convey this information in our profession?
Yeah, it's a very good question. In a way, there's very specific knowledge that is being produced in the field of architecture to develop other ways of relating to energy. Energy in itself is not necessarily a problem in the world. The problem is the culture of fossil fuels that it's been inherited, and how to produce a collective transitioning. The transitioning, the difficulty to produce a transitioning speaks of the intersectionality of architecture, right? Like the inerces are because there's a huge amount of entanglements. So we could easily imagine a solution, let's say, but the solution to get there is what the process of innovation requires, which is a huge disentanglement and re-entanglement of many, many layers of reality. And that's what I'm trying to unpack and to intervene. Many of them are very distant to the only question about energy, whether fossil or renewable, for instance. You know, they come with other notions, for instance, of how we deal with toxicity, or what is the way that as a society we deal with inequality, or what is the notions of aesthetics that we want, and how we sense reality. All these different layers need to be put on the table. You cannot only put one question, like, okay, because that would be very easy. You can say it's easy to replace fossil fuels by renewable energy. That's easy. But it's not easy if you start putting on the table all the different realities that intersect with that tiny question. The idea of modern architecture was that you can isolate one question. You can isolate the question, resolve it, and that's it. But what even those contemporary accounts of how modern architecture operated, they're accounting for the complexity that was required to produce tiny changes. There's a culture of change that is much more heavy than just invention. And the distance between invention and innovation is crucial. Innovation requires a huge process of societal evolution. And it can only happen if we acknowledge that that process of innovation is political, because it has all these layers that are heavily constructed ideologically. And architecture produces that ideology and contributes to make it change, to confront it, to make it evolve. But only the question about the aesthetics is crucial. For me, aesthetics are not about beautiful things or style, or I like this kind of, I don't know, minimalistic style, or I like this Baroque style. It's not like that. It's how we sense the world. The air in New York was green, was yellow in the 1980s. If you go to independent movies filmed in New York in the 1980s, you will see that the sky was yellow. The aesthetics of Bloomberg are about blue skies. And that's the 40 Resilient Cities project. That's, you know, like many, many projects of cleaning the center of cities are about basically the aesthetic project of turning their skies blue. But that normally happens by displacing toxicity to a ring that is very close to the center. And those skies become much more yellowish. So how we develop a language, an aesthetics, an aesthetical construction that allowed us to see the ring that is beyond the center when we look at the center. And we can say, this city is incredibly ugly because it has blue skies that are surrounded by yellow skies. Like Sao Paulo, for instance. Sao Paulo was one of the 40 resilient cities. The huge investment in improving the quality of the air in the city center was made at the expenses of the areas around it becoming much more polluted, right? So and people go to see Sao Paulo and they might say, oh, Sao Paulo is much better now. But those that drive 5 hours every day to go to clean the classes in the city center, and by basically moving away from the city center, which is something that they're forced to do because the prices of the city center raised as the sky was getting cleaner, basically they're contributing to pollute the ring around the city because they have to drive every day for 5 hours, whereas when they live in the city center, they didn't have to drive, but the rentals were cheaper, right? So we should be able to develop a language that allowed us to see the Sao Paulo city center and say, it was much better before, actually, you know, even though it was a little bit yellowish. So those aesthetic transformations, this is our field. This is what we do. When we do renderings, we produce desire through the renderings. And that is our task now, to undo a culture of inequality, intersecting the culture of sustainability and evolve into something that is much more understanding the relationship, trans-territorial relationships.
Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Thank you very much, Andres. A big round of applause, please.
Thank you.